Now at the time, more than 20 years after Pat shot me, my brain was finally mended. Killing this ginger-headed fella seemed to wake something up in me. Made me want to go sniffing around the world. So the next night, while the doc was resting, I came out of the mine, and I smelled something in the air. It was perfume, wafting down from the town, though it was some miles off. It seemed to call to me. So I lit out, not even understanding what I was doing. Headed into Fort Sumner. It was a full moon like the night I met the doc, and I heard the sound of a piano coming from the cantina. I was starting to remember cantinas and a few other things, like the kind of women you find in them. I had my charge that morning and still felt strong from it. If a man doesn't exert himself too much, why, a charge will last a good 3 days. But it's when you first get it that you feel like you can take on an army and laugh. When I got near the cantina, out comes a young fella dressed like a Spanish rancher and walking like he's had too much tequila. I stared and stared at him. I thought for a moment that it was me. He looked a hell of a lot like I did when I was young. The young fella took no notice, just kind of weaving off down the street. In a doorway next to the cantina, there was an old barefoot peon in a sombrero, a gent we sometimes bought grub from. I asked him in Espanol, "Who's that fella?" He said, "That's Senor Telesfor Jaramillo." I asked him who this Telefestor's mama was. I don't know why I asked, but somewhere in me, I was starting to remember things. He tells me his mother was Paulita Jaramillo. She married Senor Jaramillo and his child came soon after. He grinned in a way that told me it was too soon after. Then it came all over solemn. But she has died now, he says. I felt struck by lightning of a different kind then. Paulita dead. And a child born to her, a grown child, who looked like me. All of a sudden I had a fierce headache and I had to sit down, right there on the road, because of what was coming back to me. I was hammered down by a hailstorm of pictures in my mind. Telefestor Jaramillo. He had to be my son with Paulita. And then I remembered who Telefestor's father truly was. Remembered all about myself. William Henry McCarty, alias William Bonney, alias Billy the Kid. Now I had no real fear anyone in town would recognize me. It was more than 20 years, and I looked a hell of a lot different anyhow. My skin, well, you can see for yourself. The doc had dipped me in some kind of preserving tonic when he first brought me into the mine, and it still shows. I thought of going after that young man, telling him who I was, but I could not tell him what I was. He believed he was the son of Senor Jaramillo. It was better that he went on believing that, because I was kind of a half man and half corpse. I could not bear for him to know what I was, and I could not lie to him. Bub, I felt my heart had been dropped down a deep, cold well. I determined to leave Fort Sumner. I could not be so close to my son and never speak to him. I am ashamed to say I scarcely gave a thought to old Doc. He had plenty of his charged tonic to hand, but I should have stayed with him, for he'd been poorly. I just stood up there in the street and walked to the livery stable. I had some gold on me, which the doctor gave me for emergencies. I would make my way. I would be weaker without the thunderbolt canker, but I surely could live without it. I found an old man working at the livery and bought him a tequila to get some questions answered. Found out there was no use going after Pete Maxwell, who had betrayed me to the law. He died in 1898 and was beyond my reach. But I could get to Pat Garrett, for he was known to be alive and well. I bought a horse and a saddle and I rode out to find Pat. Everyone knew about Sheriff Garrett. They all knew he had killed Billy the Kid and was damn proud of it. Crowed about it in a book. Old Pat was still in New Mexico. I had him a ranch in the San Andreas Mountains. I set to finding his place, asked around in those hills, saying I wanted to work with him. A couple of cowpunchers pointed me to his place. When I got close, I climbed a bluff that looked down on Pat's layout, spying it out. I was lying there, flattened down and admiring his herd of quarter horses, trying to decide how I'd kill him. When I started to feel real weak, I ate some jerky and the food helped, but not enough. Then I knew it was the thunderbolt. It seemed I needed it to live on after all. Maybe it was a kind of addiction. I'd never been so long away from the canker, and I hadn't counted on the exertion. Seemed 3 days was all a charge was good for. I had to ride hard to get back home. Killed my horse just getting there. I made it into the mines, staggering by the time I got to the canker and got my thunderbolt in me. I reckon I had come back looking sickly, but Doc Vic didn't look much better than me. He was laid out flat on his back in the lowest chamber of the mine. He had been slowing down some, age finally catching up with him. He didn't say so, but I worked out that my being gone for 3 days had a kind of knocked his pins out from under him. Doc was powerful attached to me. The son he never had is what I was. And I knew just how he felt, for I had to let go of my own son. Lying there on his cot, he took my hand, smiling real sad. And he said that he had needed to go to sleep and kind of die for a while. But he wouldn't be thoroughly going dead. He would build himself up from inside, only it would take time, a long time. He closed his eyes and he asked me to lay down next to him and lay out some ice that we kept in the mine. He'd go into the long sleep there, and it'd take care of him. I will tell you straight, bub, it made me weep like a woman when he said that. He was the only father I'd ever known. I was to be alone in the world again, and I'd run out and left him to fend for himself when he was feeling low. So I gave him the tonic he kept ready for his long sleep, and he drank it right down, and went stiff as a board. But I could feel through the animal magnetism and all that he was still there. Ever so often his heart beat, just one little thump, and then a little while later, another. I wrapped him up good like he told me in some medicine-soaked bandages. Then I went about my business. I had some of Doc's gold and silver, and I had the buckboard and a couple of horses. I put up the canker and thunderbolt machine in the buckboard, and then I rode out. I thought about shooting down old Pat on my own, face to face. Wouldn't that have given him a turn, seeing me a short breath before he died? But there was a long memory in New Mexico about Billy the Kid, and it concerned me. I had a horror of having people look at me and laugh at the patchwork Billy I was now. Then, too, the habits of staying hid had gotten strong with me. I was Billy, but I was also a man who'd spent most of 25 years in an old silver mine. No, I had to do Pat Garrett from a good distance. Keep Billy the Kid out of it. So I played the harmless old saddle tramp, and I asked around about Pat's doings. I found that folks around about there had no great affection for him and his bad temper, especially a one-time cowboy turned goat rancher, a hard-bitten, red-faced young fella named Jesse Wayne Brazil. Pat was always shouting about Brazil to keep his goddamn goats off his land,